The meeting to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. We don't have any public comment today. We'll start with number 4, approval of the September 12th, 2023 Public Safety Committee meeting minutes. Move to approve by Supervisor Mask, second by Supervisor Marash. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. 5, policy issues discussion and potential committee determination, none. 6, operations functions required by statute, ordinance, resolution, or policy. A, discussion of HR Finance and Property Committee 2024 budget, proposed budget, and possible recommendations regarding modifications. So per the packet, we'll go right in order, and we'll start with the Clerk of Courts. I'll kick us off if I can, Mr. Chair, very quickly. Kelly will start, but each of the departments are here that you have that are underneath your purview that report to your committee. I just want to start with a preface that I said at the full board meeting when I delivered the budget. From a policy standpoint, certainly from an administration standpoint, this is a pretty status quo budget. There's not anywhere in the budget where, hey, here's a new program and it's $500,000. It's a new initiative that we got direction from the board to include in the budget. It is essentially a cost to continue in many respects for each of the departments. Now, I did ask the departments to come in and be available to answer any questions you guys may have, because each department is certainly unique, and they have made some changes to their individual budgets to fit within the direction that I provided based on the information I had from the board, which was really to try to minimize the increase in the operating budget and to cover as much as they could with respect to the increased costs for wages and health insurance. So from my perspective, very status quo budget, but certainly feel free to to ask any questions you may have. And I don't know if Chair Robinson from HR Finance and Property wants to provide any additional context for what HR Finance is looking for from each of the committees.
Musical mics. I think what we're looking for is just input from you today, and there will be a second opportunity when you meet again in November. We're trying to expand the involvement of the standing committees in trying to set some of the priorities, which started with our educational presentation last spring, and the discussions on the budgets, and the fees, fines, forfeitures, reviews. And so we welcome your input. The Finance Committee will be meeting tomorrow, then finalizing the budget for publication next Monday morning, but there will be ongoing review and discussion up till probably November 9th, when the county board will finally be realizing it. So there are opportunities for additional input throughout that process.
Okay, I was looking at this the other day, and for example, under Clerk of Courts, you have the amended budget for state grants. It says $462,000 and some change, and then for the year to date, it shows a blank, a dash mark. Now, and then the other numbers coming in are higher, and everything varies, I see. And I was just curious. How do you guys come up with this stuff?
Thank you for that. I neglected to add the second part of my opening comments. So from a policy standpoint, the budget is status quo. There's not many new programs or services. From the accounting standpoint, it is dramatically different, and that's what you're seeing. When we delivered the budget, we talked about how we are moving to a new Workday system, a new accounting system. And we're going to go from 36,000 accounts to mirror the state chart of accounts. So we're really consolidating a lot of things. You'll hear us probably use the word mapping, or things were mapped differently. So yeah, to your point, a lot of those dashes are things that were previously coded one way that now moving forward, we're going to mirror that state chart of accounts approach where things are going to be mapped differently. So I'll give you one example from administration, and it's going to be mirrored in a couple other departments. We used to have grants within our operating budgets. Now, Christy and her team pulled those out, and each and every individual grant, not every grant, but the vast majority of grants go into the grant fund. So you'll see when you get into some of these departments, you'll not only have their 101 general fund, but you also have a grant fund. That changes how things are captured relative to accounting, but from a programmatic standpoint, again, I want to just emphasize, and those are great questions that we can try to talk you through, but it really isn't much of a programmatics change. It's a change in how we account for something. So Highway gave an example. We used to have 2 lines for diesel fuel and unleaded. We no longer have 2 lines. The simple example is we have 1 line that says fuel. That's a very small example of what you're talking about. We might have 3 things that used to be each accounted for separately. Now they're one. And the sheriff's office budget is a good place where you can see a lot of those things are, you'll have large numbers, $1 million from 2023 that we used to have budgeted in a line, and now there's 0. That doesn't mean we decrease the budget by $1 million. It's somewhere else in terms of how we're accounting things to mirror the state chart of accounts and the policies and practices that Christy and her team wanted to put in place. But it's not a programmatic change, not a policy change. I don't know, Christy, if you wanted to add anything to that.
In regards to the state grant for the clerk of court's office, since the time we printed these, there is a recording of $77,157. It comes in at different times of the year. So the actuals are, again, there is mapping changes, but some of the funds don't come in from the state of Wisconsin until other parts of the year. So that's probably why you're seeing it there. But there has been one amount of revenue that has come in since the time the reports were run.
Okay, what I'm looking at is it'd be nice, because when you look at this, it's confusing, especially not knowing some of this stuff, and being able to look at this and, okay, I understand that. That's where I want to be, not, I look at it and I see, well, why is that missing or why is this missing? And I haven't had the largest amount of time for that, but I'd like to be able to look at it and understand is what I'm getting at.
I don't know that we're gonna be able to do
The other item,
that
though,
for
is
you.
that we just went to the system and we are still cleaning some of it up. So we provided you what was in the Workday system itself, and we're still processing some of the entries that we have to make to clean some of the items up too. So that's one of our hopes, is that you get familiar with this. It is really confusing because it's a brand new way of looking at things, and we hope that once we get used to it, both on the board level, committee level, and the staff level, it'll be a lot easier to understand and give you a lot more additional information than we had in the past.
Yeah, I will add one other thing. There are a lot of portions of the budget that department heads don't even get to touch. I'll just, when you look at expenses, salaries, wages, health insurance, unemployment comp, they don't get to touch any of that. That's set by HR, our HR department and our finance department. So to your point about not only is it confusing, but there's also a lot of things that, the cost of these things is what the cost of the things are. The real question, I think, going back to what Chair Robinson referenced before, is from a programmatic standpoint, are there changes you want from the array of services that we deliver? Those are the questions that we went around months ago to try to get that insight. And suffice to say, there wasn't anything that we were like, hey, cut this, we don't want to be doing this anymore. So the budget, as I referenced before, is really status quo. But certainly Kelly can do a couple of highlights. In fact, we are going to be asking HR Finance to make one change with respect to Kelly's budget, upping both some revenue and some expense projections. And she can talk you through kind of what our thought process there is, but it relates to the increased number of court appointments for counsel that we have to make. and those come at significant expense. But if you have any questions about kind of, hey, what are these areas, happy to take that through. But no, I don't want to, Kelly. You can kind of talk through what were the big changes in your budget.
Kelly, can you hold on just one second? Supervisor Moranch, do you have a question? You're fine?
Yeah, she can go and then.
Okay.
You want me to go first? Yeah. Okay. So actually, in our this year, this keeps going out. Everything is exactly the same as it was last year, except for the legal services fees that we have projected for next year. Always budgeted how many years, but it's been $600,000 a year for legal fees. For coin appointed attorneys. And if you notice in 2023 mid-September actuals, we're already over that 600,000 and we still have a couple months to go. So we were looking at increasing that amount for next year up to $750,000, and then also up on top with the revenue under court fees and costs, that requested budget would go up to $900,183. So I believe we have an amendment in the works to present for that.
Yeah, there's an item in your packet, and that was, Kelly had come in and thought those estimates were a little low, and we were not able to enter them and adapt it prior to us sending this off to the Finance Committee. So there is an amendment there, a friendly amendment for there to, even if the Public Safety Committee wanted to approve it, so that we could get those revenues and expenditures in her budget right-sized, and it does not affect the levy, but we'll give her enough funding to do the legal fees. And in all cases, Clerk of Courts has always been an office where they're kind of an animal of what happens in the court system, so we don't want to highly fluctuate things. This puts her at the proper amount, but there could be issues with court cases or a high number of people having to come in to testify. And if those are way over and beyond what we typically see in a year, we always ask that the Clerk of Courts go to the Finance Committee or the County Board for Contingency Fund, because that's typically once in maybe 5 to 6 years that you're going to see a prevalence of high-cost jury trials or those types of things. But this was well within the normal parameters of what she can anticipate on an annual basis.
And I think what also will help that, now that the public defender rate went up to $100 per hour, like our county appointment rate, I think we're going to see that county appointments might slightly go down a little bit this next year because they will be eligible for a public defender at that higher rate as well. So that might make a difference with that. And the reason that'll help is because we're having a hard time getting public defenders to take cases, and maybe with this new rate of the $100 per hour, we're going to get more attorneys that'll be willing to accept those cases where the county or the judges won't be appointing at county expense.
Question.
Yeah.
For other special services for mid-September of 23, it says 22, and then amended budget for 23 and 24 is 115,000. What kind of special services is that for? Just curious. I don't know. That's why I'm
Find that.
asking.
Do you have it?
I'll have to go into a separate report, but I can take a look. I can get that information out.
Yeah, I'm just curious. And then for interpreting and translating services, I'm guessing that's got the dashes because it's going into a different bucket or a different mapping. So I think that I'm just wondering where it is and if we're going to have enough allocated for that, because I'm guessing that we're going to need more translating services as the years go by.
It's interesting with that, though, because a lot of hearings now are being taken or being done by Zoom with the interpreters by Zoom and not in person. So it's not costing us exactly like it used to because they're not charging for travel time. So that's been helping a lot with those fees, too. But where that goes, that for Christy, I'm having a hard time with these, too.
So obviously do you know where that would be, Christy, where that was put? Okay.
Taking a look, I'm used to two screens, so now I have a small one, so I will get back to you. I'll take a look and get those answers.
Perfect.
On a good note, that we have collected nearly $9 million in old debt since 2017, and we continue doing a really good job with that. This is the first year where we've actually dropped down a little bit. I think it's over 600,000 right now at this point, but just for this year. But we're doing an excellent job collecting old debt. In fact, last week we had a payment that came through Tax Intercept from a 1988 case that's been hanging out there that long. So that was pretty exciting to see that come through.
Go ahead.
When you look at the net grand totals on the bottom, and you see revenue grand totals and expense grand totals, and it shows that we're kind of in the red. Where is the excess money coming from? Is that tax levy or is that okay?
So the revenue's at the top, so if you're looking at page 3 of the packet, those are all the revenues that are non-tax levy revenues that are collected by the clerk of courts. And just again, for context, the clerk of courts is one of those departments that does have a significant amount of non-tax levy revenue streams. That said, it's still a pretty inequitable share between the county and the state. When you look at our expenses, those roll in everything from salaries and wages to all other expenses. So netting out our 2 years, 2023, the 2023 amended budget column is actually our attempt to map everything from this year, 2023, to the new accounts. So you'll see that actually overall, in terms of overall expense totals for the clerk of courts, they're actually down in expense slightly from 2024. Relative to the revenue grand totals, Christie, that's my understanding, is that the net grand total amount is the levy allocation, correct?
Yes.
While Christie's going through that, Kelly, did you have anything else, or could we move on to the
You
DA?
can move on.
All right,
I'm
let's
good.
go
Thank you
to
very much.
Teresa with the DA's office then.
Everything, not to repeat what Kelly said, but everything in our budget has pretty much stayed the same. Obviously, there was a discussion with this committee on the diversion fees, so that may be somewhat of an adjustment. But otherwise, I think the columns are virtually the same. We did, you'll note one of the main revenues, other than diversion fees, is the discovery fees that our office charges for both paper and digital discovery. As we've reported to this committee in the past, that's a very, very high volume of material that goes through our office every day. And that is that revenue that you see. Otherwise, we're not a office that's going to be bringing in revenue generally, but it's to recoup the costs on discovery. I don't really have anything other than that.
Questions for Teresa? All right, we'll move on to emergency government.
Okay. Special services rolls up into five different categories. So the $115,000 that was in the amended budget for 2023 includes court reporter, technology services, transcription services, and other services, and interpreter services. The $22 was a disposal fee to Jaeger for disposing of a TV.
All right, for emergency management, primarily we are funded by 2 grants, the Emergency Management Performance Grant and the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. They're a 1-for-1 grant or a 2-for-1 grant. And then also our other revenue sources are additional grants such as the commodity flow study through the HMGP grant program that we use. Other than that, no new programs are identified in this grant, or this budget rather, and it's essentially the same from last year. I would just point out that, as Lance mentioned, that there is it may look a bit confusing as far as what the changes are from the previous year from our revenues and our expenses from the levy and the grant funds.
I'll just make one comment. The old way that we did this in our legacy system is they were all commingled within the department's budget. And the nice thing as we get used to using the new format is that the general fund, which is where the clerk of courts, district attorney, and the emergency government departments live, separates out the activities that they're doing that are not contingent upon funding from other sources, grant sources. So it's kind of a nice way of now looking at it. The grant funding should be a 1-for-1. Revenues are the revenues that are generated by the grants, and the expenditures are going to be the cost associated with the activities that those departments are doing. So in the future, I think that will be a nicer way of you guys being able to distinguish between their activities and which ones are actually earmarked by specific grants to do a specific purpose.
Any questions? All right, we'll move on to the medical examiner.
Thank you. Our budget is exactly the same as last year. For the actual operating part of the budget, we did move some items into new categories that were more fitting now that those options were available, such as publication of legal notices. Every once in a while, we have to do legal notices in the local papers if we are unable to locate legal next of kin. So now we actually have a budget line for that, whereas before it was tied into other parts of our budget that were not really assigned just to that area, but we're not asking any additional levy for our budget. The only change is just the staffing area. We did notice that after this final budget message came out that there was an error on it in the staffing structure where they had too much money added to overtime and special activity pay and did not have our on-call pay in that section. Christy and our team were able to do an amendment that will be presented tomorrow at HR Finance Committee for that change, and the additional funding would be placed into the facilities budget. So if you're looking at our totals, our total looks a lot higher this year for a levy, but it is not. It is those extra costs are just artificially inflaming that.
And when I got the email from Jessica, the medical examiner, saying, oh my gosh, my budget's too high, within an hour I got an email from the facilities manager, oh my gosh, I don't have enough money from water. And that's why that happened the way that we've presented it. So it was the timing of it, and I talked to both departments. That's kind of how it worked. It was no real thought about it, except that 2 departments reviewed their budgets, and one was up a little bit and one was down, and hopefully both you should be fine. And then facilities, hopefully they'll be able to manage the increase that they receive from the Wausau Water Works, and those will be presented as a friendly amendment at the facilities or at the Finance Committee meeting tomorrow.
And just so it's in your packet, it's on page 22, similar to what we did with the clerk of courts. We had just highlighted those changes. Those proposed changes, I should say.
Question for the medical examiner. All right, then we will move on to the sheriff's office.
real quickly, just some highlights from our budget. And I wanted to put it visually because it's easier for me to explain it and to remember what I wanted to share with you. We have 193 full-time equivalents at the sheriff's office. When you add in the part-time staff that work for us, we have over 200 people working 24/7, 365 days. There are 5 divisions within our office, but I'm going to highlight the ones that really impact the budget this year especially, that I think some things we've already talked about in previous meetings, but things we want to share. Our budget is roughly $24 million. You see that in the budget explanation that you have. And overall, we had a less than 1% increase in what we're asking for. We're asking for about $217,000. But I'm here to tell you that that number can be driven down if we can control the inmate population and if we can get staff hired in order to supervise these folks within our jail. We are not asking for or looking to start any new programs as we head into the new year. It's kind of funny. Lance had said status quo. We're looking to operate status quo. That said, our focus is going to be on recruiting and retaining staff in order to bring our inmates back in order to control some costs. So some of the things we did is we've renegotiated a meal contract within the jail. Currently, that meal contract is being serviced by North Central Healthcare. They've been gracious enough to step up and help us when we were having issues. The new vendor has already proposed to us, and that cost for those meals is going to go down about $143,000. That assumes that we have 150 inmates in our jail. If we don't have inmates in our jail, the cost of food and service goes up even though your inmates go down, and you're still going to run into a problem where you're either going to be cost neutral, you're not going to save anything, or there's a potential you could spend more. The other thing that we are doing is we're housing out. Let me see here. Before I get there, we've got this new inmate technology program we're running in the jail where inmates have enhanced capabilities with telephone, email, messaging, and then tablets in order to do recreation. They can play some games that are appropriate and so forth. The revenue on that alone in the new year is going to be an additional $120,000. Again, that contract is contingent upon us having 150 inmates. So we're going to get $150,000 for 150 inmates. Our jail will safely hold about 240 inmates. There's a potential there, if we get our inmates back, that revenue could be $240,000. Right now, we're going to be conservative in that estimate, and when we did our budgeting, we did it conservatively with $150,000 revenue there, $120,000 more than we received in 2023. The Juvenile Secure Detention Center. I know we've talked about it at length. We talked about it during our last meeting. I had a conversation with Sheriff Lucas in Portage County yesterday talking about some unrelated issues, and he informed me that he's at a point where he may be shutting down a portion of his secure detention center and having to house out all of his female juveniles to another facility. That would likely be us. Facilities are closing up, and there's opportunity for us to keep that business going and keep it strong because our revenues already this year are at or about to exceed what we had projected for this year, and we're probably going to be about $100,000 to $200,000 more this year. And you've got to remember that we didn't get that business up and running really strong and have a foothold until about April. So we lost 3 months that we now have a system in place where we think we can do better. So we've projected our revenues within the Secure Detention Center at $1 million. We're currently at about $834,000, if I remember from the budget detail. So we believe we can easily hit that mark and likely exceed that. Our number one priority as we head into the new year, and that's why I've got this corrections image here, has got to be recruiting and retaining corrections officers. Our business hinges on that. If we can't get that done, we talked about it last month. The cost of doing business another way, quite frankly, is just something that we can't afford as a county. We're talking about $3.285 million if we can't get this figured out. I think we have a plan in place. I've been working with the jail administrator and chief deputy, and I think that we know where we're going and what will work in order to get us to where we need to be. The other thing that we want to do is as soon as we get our staffing to the point where we can manage our inmates, we want to bring back as many of our inmates as we possibly can. That provides additional revenue for us within the facility, but it also decreases our expenditures by having these people housed out somewhere else. And we also need to continue working with all of our diversion programs, the programs that Teresa runs in her office, and some of the justice programs that we have here, because that keeps people out of our facility. We just had a meeting with the judges before I came here where we talked about different processes we have, and diversion and some deflection programs really help us manage that jail population so we're not housing these folks out in other facilities or here and incurring all the expenses that goes along with that, and when you start thinking about food and medical and so forth. Now, one thing that we've had budgeted for several years, and it's something that's coming up again this year. I'm going to speak about it in general terms because we're currently in negotiations with a vendor. We need to negotiate a new radio maintenance contract with a vendor, and we have one proposer who is coming in, and it's the same vendor we've been working with, and they will maintain all of our 17 tower sites within Marathon County, the land LMR bill, land mobile radio, all right, and our microwave system and our 911 dispatch equipment. So we currently have built into the budget that you have enough money to cover that. But again, we're working with that vendor on negotiating it, and we hope to come in under where we've projected, but we had to put a number in there as a placeholder. So we think that we're going to come in under that. So if you remember that $217,000 number that I put out in front of you early on, our goal is to continue to whittle away at that number with all the different initiatives we have. So one thing that you should put on your radar for next year, it's not a new program, but it would be in essence an expansion, is Rib Mountain has already approached us and said they want a third deputy. But they're looking at the third quarter of next year. And remember, they pay for everything. They pay wages, fringes, vehicle, training. They pay for all of that. So that would be just expanding that in the village of Rib Mountain. And then we're working on a universal marketing strategy for all of our divisions. I know I really focused on corrections, but we're also focused on our patrol division and in our 911 center to make sure that we have a good pool of candidates because we see what's happening in other communities and we don't want to be in that position. So we're moving that forward. And then something that we've brushed on in previous meetings, and it's a revenue source for us, so I thought I would mention it, is the highway department uses a vendor for processing permit fees, and that vendor is called Oxcart. We recently learned of them. Oxcart is a company that will help us take care of alarm permitting in a more efficient manner, and it will allow us to, instead of waiting for one time in the year to bill everyone, allow us to bill people as we learn that they have installed a new alarm. They've never told us they had an alarm, and we learn that by going to their home or their business, and we can get them to pay that alarm permit fee now, as opposed to everybody in January through March. So we'll be able to bring in additional revenue throughout the year as opposed to holding off on it into the new year. So high level, those are some of the things that we're working at the Sheriff's Office and that we put together when we thought about the budget. I echo some of the other comments here earlier. If it wasn't for Christy and her team, I don't know how we would have understood those reports or how to work in the new tools. And like you, we're learning as well. So with that, any questions?
All right. Thank you, Sheriff Billup.
I think in terms of programs, we don't have anything in the packet, Mr. Chair, but there was a question about just generally speaking our diversion programs and how those, Sheriff Billup already referenced the positive impact they can have. I know you've gotten reports in the past from Teresa and Ruth on diversion, but there was a request for some justice system program updates, and I know Judge O'Neill's in the back patiently waiting, and I think she's ready to talk through a couple of things with Laura.
So with that, we turn it over to Judge O'Neill.
So thanks for having me. So I do just want to share some information about the diversion programs and answer any specific questions that you may have. As you know, I'm Suzanne O'Neill. I'm the judge in Branch 1. I've been involved in Marathon County justice system for 20 plus years, and much of my time has been spent working with the diversion programs and trying to develop some of them. So I'll just start generally summarizing some of the programs that we offer. So to begin with, we started our OWI court, which is now converting to an alcohol treatment court. Several years ago, I think we first opened in 2011. And initially, that court was developed to really focus on felony level OWI convictions. At the time, we had a number of homicide deaths caused by drunk driving. Treatment courts were developing throughout the state and the nation, and that was recognized as a need in Marathon County. I think District Attorney Heimerman was involved. Of course, Teresa was an assistant at that time, but that program was really focused at the high-end OWI offenders. Since that time, the law has changed so that we're not able to serve that population. So our population has really decreased because there's a mandatory prison sentence now on OWI fifths and above. So we're really only able to service OWI fourths and below now with our OWI court. And we found that our population really was decreasing. So we recently have tried to modify our target population, and now we are working toward felony offenses where alcohol consumption and addiction are a driving factor in the offender's conduct. So just to let you know that our current numbers for that program are relatively low. Right now we only have 3 active participants. However, historically we have had up to 25 in that program before the law was changed. Since the program started in 2011, we had 109 total admissions. 92 individuals graduated from that program. And during the time that we did serve the high-end felony offenders, we did have an 87.62 graduation rate or success rate. And when you look at what the graduation rates are nationwide for this type of program, as well as specifically in Wisconsin, our graduation rate was higher than the average. I believe statewide treatment court average success rate is 48.6%. And again, we had an 87.62% graduation rate. So it was a highly successful program. And I would note that when we looked at the numbers as to how many graduates recidivated, there was an 18.5% recidivism rate. But if you look at the Wisconsin recidivism rate for OWI offenders, it is 37.4%. So it was a significant improvement. When individuals are in any of our treatment courts, and this includes, I'll talk about drug treatment court next, our treatment recovery courts are formulated and based upon national standards. We adopt the 10 key components that have been scientifically established to be successful. And we address not just the addiction alone. There are so many factors that lead a person to addiction and so many consequences. We really start from the beginning, holding jobs. Most of our participants, when we get to the program, are unemployed and have not been employed for a significant period of time. And just getting them working to begin with is just one step. A lot of them don't have housing. Housing is part of the component as well, providing stable housing. And so when you look at some of, and I guess just finishing up on the OWI court, we again recognized that we needed to change that population due to the change in the law. But our OWI court, I think overall has been very successful. And we do hope to move forward this year with a new population. Whether or not that's going to work, honestly, I don't think any of us know right now. But we do know that alcohol oftentimes is a factor in people's conduct, and that with treatment and their addiction under control, they can be law-abiding, successful members of our community. I'd like to talk a little bit then also about our drug recovery court, again, based on the national standards for treatment courts. Our OWI, our drug recovery courts opened in 2018. Since that time, we have had 36 graduates of that program. We've had a total of 84 admissions, 36 graduates. The target population for this court are people with lengthy criminal histories with high need and high risk areas. So they're a very difficult population to work with. And when I started by saying that they don't even have jobs, I think that if I recall the number, I appreciate Lori got me a lot of the numbers. If I recall, of the 36 graduates that have finished the program at the start, I think only 3 of them actually had employment when they started. And by the time they graduated, they are required to have employment. And we are also focusing on giving priority to those who have children placed outside the home to be involved in this program. Much of the drug addiction in our community, as I'm sure you know, is heroin and methamphetamine based. And it is difficult to treat these individuals, but we have had great success. So in addition to providing them with sober living and assistance in obtaining employment, they're also provided intensive therapy and treatment, sometimes inpatient treatment. And really, we have several participants who are in their 20s, and literally they do not know how to adult. They don't know how to schedule. They don't know how to go to a meeting. They don't know how to apply for a job. They don't know how to be responsible with their money. They just really are clueless. And through this program, we've been able to watch a number of those individuals grow up, quite frankly, in the court, and to learn how to schedule an appointment, make that appointment, get that job, and be successful in the community. We've also had a number of participants in our program become pregnant during their time in our program, and I believe that 6 babies have been birthed during their participation in the drug recovery treatment, and those 6 children were born drug-free. When you look at the numbers as to who has participated with children, we have had 56 minor children impacted by the drug recovery court. 28 minor children were living in an out-of-home placement when their parents started the program. 34 children were ultimately reunited or able to remain with a parent, and 18 children were able to establish regular contact with their parents while they were in the program. So we have had some impact not only on the generation who are suffering from the addiction, but also the children who these individuals are trying to raise. Only 30 of the 36 participants who graduated were employed upon entry of the program. There's the number I was looking for. The other 3 that did not have employment at graduation had been determined to be disabled and were receiving disability benefits. The benefit or cost for treatment courts has been determined to be $4.17 at the cost of $1 of treatment. So for every $1 that we're paying, that this county is paying for treatment, we're saving $4.17. And with regard to funding of both the alcohol treatment court and the drug recovery court, the drug recovery court is grant funded currently. The alcohol treatment court started out with grant funding, but now is being funded by the county. So those are the 2 main treatment courts that we have. That I do have some question with regard to funding levels. Currently, we are receiving in the county $238,950 from the Department of Corrections, and then there's the $150,000 TAD grant that is awarded for the drug treatment court. So that leaves $401,012 of tax levy supporting the treatment courts. And so those are the 2 main treatment courts that we have in the county. And again, they are evidence-based. and all the team members that are part of that court are provided training opportunities so that they understand the standards and how to work at treatment court. Because if you ever want to come and look at a treatment court, it's very different. It's not what you would think of as traditional court. They're given chance after chance after chance because they're working with therapy, through the therapy. And when we see the benefits that they're growing in the program, they are given a number of chances. Recovery is difficult. Relapses happen. But again, we've had great success because of the treatment providers that we have and the opportunities that they've been given. So again, our success rates really are relatively remarkable, and the programs have been successful. Moving on then to some of the other diversion programs that we have the SSTOP program and the OAR and OWL diversion programs. The SSTOP program is intended to really encourage and incentivize individuals who are charged with OWI to getting treatment as early as possible. And I know Laura was kind enough to share with me some of the numbers that the county had prior to SSTOP. And the concern, I think it was back in 2002, 2003, was that when you're convicted or charged with, convicted of an operating while intoxicated offense, you are required to complete a driver safety plan, which includes an alcohol and drug assessment, and it provides safety for all of us, right? If people do the assessment, they do treatment, we want them to have a license, we just don't want them to drink and drive. Back in 2002, there were 869 offenders referred for the assessment in the county. Only 640 offenders actually followed through to get the assessment. 229 offenders then were not assessed. And by 2003, so a year later when the numbers were run, 92 of the 213 individuals that did not do their assessment had a documented new OWI offense since their failure to be assessed. So 118 of the 213 who did not comply were already referred for an OWI second or above. They became a repeat offender. So it was an initiative to try to really incentivize getting the assessment and following through on the recommended treatment. As far as actual numbers, as of October 1st of this year, 79 participants have been served in the program as of October 1st. 8 are currently pending referrals, so those would be in addition to the 79. There are currently 33 active participants. 38 have completed the program this year. 22 successful completions. And then there were 12 individuals who did not follow through on the SSTOP following. So they originally participated, but were not sentenced to complete SSTOP. And then there were 4 who were unsuccessful. 77% of successful completions did obtain their license. So if they do the program, 77% of those people do become licensed. So that's a pretty significant number because, again, if people are licensed, chances are we're a safer community than people who are driving without a license. And if they've done the assessment and done the treatment to get their license, our streets are safer. Additionally, we have the OAR, OWL program, so operating without a license and operating after revocation, to really encourage people to get their licenses. A lot of people fall into the trap of losing their license and just either not caring or not knowing how to get their license back. And it's a program really set up to show people how to get their license back and encourage them and work with them to do some of the legwork to get those licenses. Currently, there are 39 actively participating in this program. 28 have completed the program this year. Moving on then to our pretrial assessment and case management program, a relatively new program. I'm sure you're all aware that nationwide there's a push to eliminate cash bail. Securing individuals who are charged with a crime in custody on cash bail has not been proven to reduce or increase safety in the community, and that when you impose cash bail on people who cannot post it, you're not serving the community as effectively as you might be able to, because it's not correlated with safety, and obviously it's costing the county money to incarcerate people who are facing charges and unable to post the cash. Obviously, it's somewhat of a contested issue, and I'm sure the district attorney may have a different opinion, but that's somewhat of the national discussion that we should be reducing cash bail, and there are certain states, such as I know Illinois, that has eradicated cash bail. With that movement, the state of Wisconsin developed a pilot program, which Marathon County is part of. That program is to release individuals from custody facing charges on bond with the requirement that they be supervised, and we have adopted that supervision program with the assistance of ADDIC. Again, this is a pilot program, and we received a grant through the Department of Justice. This year we received $92,000 for that grant, and this program, again, is evidence-based decision-making initiative that the state is promoting, and we are a part of. When we look at the goal, of course, is to maximize pretrial release and minimize failure to appears, as well as to reduce criminal activity. And once basically they are assessed at the jail in the morning before a bond hearing, and the judge is given the public safety assessment before setting bail. And when the defendant is released and ordered to participate in the pretrial supervision program, they're required to report to ADDIC Correctional Services within 48 hours for an intake. And as they are out on bail, then waiting for their cases, they are required to check in with ADDIC. ADDIC checks in with them. They get text reminders about court. But ADDIC also assesses them for treatment needs and encourages people with substance abuse issues or other treatment needs to get involved in treatment before their cases even go to trial, to really, again, try to encourage behavior changes before they're sentenced, and hopefully those behavior changes will last. So not only do people have addictions, but they have significant mental health issues, oftentimes in the criminal justice system, and they're provided those resources or directed to those resources while they're on the pretrial supervision program. So just number-wise, we've done about 1,500 assessments. So the program started, I believe, in 2022 or 2021. Okay. So we have the numbers, though, from 2022, and there were 1,500 total assessments done. There were 755 defendants referred to the pretrial supervision program. 532 of those individuals were released from program, so 398 were actually admitted for case management. And again, the case management includes reminders to go to court. They're provided with referrals for services, and the case manager also provides the court with a report as to how they're doing on supervision, if they're in compliance, if they're not in compliance, and if they're not in compliance, then the district attorney's office can seek to amend the bond so that that bond is changed, and they might end up in custody then if they're not in compliance. Additionally, we have the diversion programs. You're all well aware of the diversion programs that are set up by the district attorney's office and managed through them. Additionally, ADDIC does provide some supervision for Diversion, we have what used to be called, well, it probably still is called the Volunteers in Probation Diversion Program. That years ago was set up with an actual volunteer in the community to help people that were being diverted. It's very difficult to get people to volunteer for that. So the program has morphed somewhat, but basically it's a program where defendants enter pleas. Either it's a deferred prosecution agreement through the district attorney's office where they're not prosecuted, but they're expected to do certain conditions, or deferred entry of judgment agreement where they enter a plea in court and they're required to do certain conditions for a period of time. And if they meet those conditions over that time period, usually 9 months to a year, ultimately the charge can be reduced or dismissed entirely. And the program originally began with low-level offenders. It was then expanded to domestic violence offenses because there were a number of low-level domestic violent offenders who were coming through our court system who might not have needed high-end probation services, but certainly needed maybe some watchful eyes and some lower-end services to change their behaviors so that they would not be back in court and re-victimizing people. So of those diversion programs, I believe the numbers for 2022 were 228 clients were admitted to the diversion programs. Average length of stay in that program is 278 days. The completion rate is 76%. And again, these are a number of usually lower level offenders, maybe first, second time through the system. It has been expanded, I think, through Ruth's program to reach out to more complicated cases, so to speak. But the diversion program through ADDIC really are the lower level offenders. Finally, I'll just mention the community service program that we offer. And basically, we have what's called CREW. CREW is a community service program that's offered on Saturdays and Sundays for 6 hours each day, as well as 3 hours on weekdays. We've had 64 participants admitted into the community service program in 2022. 10,205 service hours were provided to the community in that year. We had 23 host agencies who received services. Host agencies include Goodwill, Salvation Army, the Parks Department, Neighbors Place, Good News Project, St. Vincent de Paul, Habitat for Humanity, and Caring Closet. 70% of those ordered to do community service successfully completed it. 844 jail days were saved in 2022 through the community service program. And if you were to evaluate out paying those hours at minimum wage, it would have cost $73,986.25 if you were to have paid those individuals. The community service program is used heavily in the treatment courts because when the individuals start the court, as I stated, oftentimes they're not employed, and oftentimes they don't know how to be employed. They don't know how to get a job, but they don't know how to maintain a schedule, and they don't know how to work and to be supervised and do what you're told and to work hard. And the community service program really helps them build those job skills that they're able then to convert ultimately into a job. So we do use that program a lot for the drug treatment course. I've probably gone on a lot longer than Administrator Leonard thought that I would, but I just wanted to try to share some of the numbers and some of the impact that these diversion programs have had on the community, because when you work in it every day and you see the people's change, you see them change. I mean, I can't even describe for you how some of these people are just unrecognizable from the moment they come into court to graduation day. And when sometimes I see them the first day in drug court, I'm like, you are not going to make it. You are such a mess. I don't know how this is going to work. And miraculously, it takes 9, 18, sometimes 24 months. It takes a long time, but it's just amazing how people can change and hopefully continue to be productive members of our society then afterwards. So, questions?
Go ahead.
Thank you for your presentation. everything on the screen, that's not in the packet, is it? Oh, it is.
It is.
Oh,
Online, Supervisor Marash, it wasn't, no, it's not on the,
Oh, okay. All right, thank you. So you listed off a bunch of numbers for how much the grants were, and I'm just curious for the OWI court, you said there's 3 active participants now, and how much was allocated to that program? And if we can take usually like 25 participants and we only have 3, what happens with that money that's allocated to that program?
I can answer that. So the OWI court was previously allocated for a full-time position. It's now a half-time position. There are 3 active participants, and there are 2 pending referrals. And there is, I think, $80,000 allocated currently to that program. So it was reduced. Part of that reduction went towards creation of our new data position. So that's where it's at right now, and we're hoping with just completing the new criteria for who can be eligible for the program, we're hoping that those will increase. We've also opened it up to alternative to revocation people who are on supervision and actively drinking and struggling to successfully complete probation.
If I can add one thing, it's in the budget message on page 34, but I don't know that I'll be able to give you an exact answer, but I want to do a report halfway through the year. That's my vision. I mean, I'll be more blunt. This new target population, it took us way too long to identify it, and then we're down to 3. If it's not a good value, I mean, that's a determination for the board to make, not for me. But my plan is to come to you with a good sort of dashboard, and I'll give you, we've only had Michael on for just a bit. She started in September, but she's done a great job trying to familiarize herself, and we have a couple of templates that she put together right now, but I want to be able to provide you with, here's the cost, here are the outcomes, a lot of them that Judge O'Neill and Laura have already referenced. And at the end of the day, you can decide whether you want to, if you have line of sight to 25 people, great. If it's not working that well, then we can talk about what else to do with it. But yeah, we're down to 3. That's not a great value for what the investment is. But my plan, as I put on page, like I said, 34, is to give you an update probably before the middle of the year, just to say, hey, how's it going? If we're sitting at 6 or 7, I mean, you guys can make the determination, but my sense is that's not a good value.
Well, and that's why I appreciate the presentation so much, because we don't know what we don't know. So, if, you know, even if they're not listed out in the numbers we have on the screen for budget for what's going to each of these programs, correct? So we have no idea. So that's why I appreciate getting more information about it. So thank you.
and so this is like, per my email to you, so we did go through this probably 3 years ago, I think. We went through all these programs. And the reason we went through them was the state of Wisconsin changed the way they did that. So when you get a 5th drunk driving, you automatically have to go to prison, where before we could put them in a diversion program. We don't have that option anymore as a county. So that was where we had a bunch of people coming and say, this is a great program. Please tell the state and the legislator not to get rid of this program. Didn't really go anywhere. That's why we're seeing the 3 people now. And what I think Administrator Leonard is saying is, can we get more people back into the program? We don't know that. If we want to exit, we can, but do we want to see if we actually will have a population that could serve? That's up to this board. Supervisor, sorry.
Mask.
Supervisor Mask.
So I was on the committee when the OWI court started, and I went to court and was really surprised at how many people were in it at the time. And of course, like Matt said, the laws changed and it really decreased who we could help. I find the presentation on the drug court to be unbelievable. that some of these people can't even figure out how to do a schedule or apply for a job. That blows me away more than the OWI court clientele had going on. And kudos to everybody who dug in and kept that thing when it first was proposed. There was opposition, but I think that it was a very good idea. And if we do abolish the OWI court, I can see the drug court being well populated for a long time. And it's nice to see you excited to see people graduate after 2 years and to see that kind of determination and help. But this is the first really in-depth presentation on the drug court. So thank you. It was very eye-opening.
Thank you.
Quick question. So if it were to be abolished, because I think this would be a pertinent information, the 3 members that are in there currently, how would they be? I mean, we wouldn't just drop them cold turkey. How would we take care of that situation? Because we do have certain people in it currently. That would be my question.
And so that would be the challenge, because you might think naturally, well, can't you just put the OWI offenders into the drug court? That seems kind of like natural, but you can't. The evidence suggests that would be more harmful than beneficial, be harmful to the drug court participants as well as the OWI offenders. So we would have to, I'm not sure what we would do with those participants, if we would have to try to work with the Department of Corrections through probation or something to continue to provide those high-end services. I really don't know how we would service those unless Laura has any great ideas. They would just kind of be lost in our treatment court model anyway. We couldn't, bottom line is we could not absorb them into the drug recovery court.
All right, thank you. Supervisor Wilhelm.
With the drug epidemic happening across the country, I mean, we're not just the only place out there, but are you seeing an uptick in more people? Because, you see out there a number of people that you don't even know are using, meth is so big right now and people are getting pinched. Are you seeing higher numbers, or is it, are you guys just taking on people that are really, like the ones you said that couldn't apply for a job or situations like that?
So with regard to the drug recovery court itself, we kind of are maxed at 25. We cannot right now service more than that. And they're referred through the district attorney's office and or defense counsel can bring them and they're chosen whether or not they're appropriate for the drug recovery court. Just anecdotally, I feel like drugs in Marathon County have just exponentially grown over the last decade. And I think at our last meeting, Teresa and Kyle, did we have in that packet, we had some numbers with regard to the filings in the state. And I don't know, in District 9, the felony drug offenses, I think, were up, but I don't know if that was specific to Marathon County itself. Okay. Is our county up,
I don't think it was specific to Marathon County. Is it possible for me to address a point earlier that you, or do I not have standing to address?
Go ahead.
Point earlier? Okay. Well, as we're talking about this, I just want people to understand that these individuals in these courts are on probation. They are supervised by the Department of Corrections through the state of Wisconsin. They have an agent. They have an agent who is working with them individually, working with alcohol and other drug assessments, connecting with counseling, working toward employment, all through the state of Wisconsin. These individuals are not out there on their own unless they have drug or alcohol court. I just want you to understand that we are providing this court as a reinforcement or a supplement to what the state through the Department of Corrections is providing by way of supervision. So if those individuals did not have OWI court, they would have the Department of Corrections still supervising them and providing alcohol and other drug treatment and access to treatment and services. It's not the level of intensity that these individuals are receiving through drug court. It's not the number of contacts and things like that. So it is a different level of supervision provided through these courts. But please understand that these individuals, were they not in these courts, would be in prison, most likely. That's the idea behind these courts, is that we're keeping them in our community with this higher intense level of supervision. And if they weren't, the alternative and the incentive is for them to participate because they're on the cusp of prison. So we didn't really talk about the population that we're talking about here, but just an understanding of what our county dollars are going toward. I think it's important for people to understand that we're providing that. And it's a hope that they'll stay in the county and they'll stay employed and that they'll stay with their families and they'll be parents. And instead of going to prison for a short period of time, getting released, and then they're not employed, they're not with their families. So I'm not trying to criticize the philosophy behind those courts, but I think it's important for people to understand how they operate with regard to treatment. So it's in addition, and for alcohol court, whether we'll have that incentive for individuals to participate in an alcohol court, whether or not there will be enough of a population is something I raised at CJCC to incentivize people to participate in this court. Are there enough individuals who would be going to prison otherwise or have an incentive to participate in this with an alcohol component that's not OWI related is really the question up for consideration, I guess, by that team. So thank you for allowing me to speak.
And I would reiterate that's true. The people that are in our recovery courts are headed to prison, and they're people with long-standing addictions and long-standing criminal histories. They've all been on probation before, and they generally have all failed before. These are really the high-risk, high-need individuals who are being provided that extra level of intense care to try to get them back on the right path. And these are individuals who would otherwise be in prison. They would be obviously costing the state money with regard to their incarceration. And then when they're released back into our community on extended supervision, they're not provided that high-end quality of treatment or supervision either. So then they're just coming back into our community on extended supervision. So absolutely, the Department of Corrections would be supervising these individuals, or probably on extended supervision because they would have already gone to prison and they've come back. So they are the high-end, high-need individuals, which is also why it just is always jaw-dropping and flabbergasting when you do see the successes, because they're just absolute messes that are transformed back into the people that they were probably at the age of 7, and then addiction hits and they became different people.
Supervisor Mask.
Just a quick question. You said there's 3 people in the OWI court right now?
Currently there are.
Are they supporting children? Are they supporting families, all 3 of them?
I haven't worked in OWI court now in a couple of years. One of them is, you know,
Technically isn't, okay, sorry. Just off the top of my head, there's an individual in the court who has a 18 to 19-year-old son that she is still parenting or helping in life, I should say, who was a minor, I believe, when she started. And then I know for sure one does not. And the third one, I'm not sure. I don't know the ins and outs of all the cases right now.
And that was one of the defenses for the OWI court, was to keep people in the community, keep them supporting their families and not having the kids go into foster care and, trying to avoid these extra expenses. Thank you.
Well, I also, on that note, I just wanted to say, too, that when you send somebody to prison, depending on how long they go, they may or may not receive any treatment in prison. And when they're in an artificial setting, such as an institution, they're not able to receive treatment while dealing with the daily schedule of life, holding a job, paying bills, being responsible as an adult. And so a lot of times they come out without the skills to hit the ground running. And they also, if they did have any stability in life, many of them lose relationships, they could lose their apartment, things that they had going for them, it actually puts them in a riskier position.
The one thing when we did have the speakers per what was said here is we had, I want to say there was 5 individuals that came back in the day, and they discussed their life and how it went through. And it's sad, but the truth is it took them, somebody saying, you're going to prison now unless you do this program, before that was their rock bottom. And that's what made them go into the program, and then have an 87% success rate, was they finally hit rock bottom. And that was kind of what was going with that program. Now, with it not being something that we can do with that, I mean, we can have other options, but that was the reason why so many people were getting into this class, was because this is my bottom. I'm either going to change or I'm going to prison. I'm not going to see my kids. I'm not, and that was their rock bottom. And they explained, there was a lot of good stories in here where they're like, here was my life up to this point, how this made me do this. So that was the backlog of that. So just wanted to point that out. And that was about 3 years ago, I think we had those discussions. So. Any further questions for Judge O'Neill? Go ahead.
I just had a question with I was looking at this thing here on Strategy 4. I don't know if that's, but like the sober housing, do you guys ever like refer people to them, the sober housing things?
Yes. So, and we do provide sober housing. The county does have apartments available for sober housing. There are expectations if you're placed in sober housing. You have to be doing the community service and or working. There's a number of months where you gotta, we'll give you notice, like you've been here too long. I think 6 months is what we initially allow them to stay in. And we'll give them a notice of not eviction, but you need to be out within 30 days. So how can we help you get your own place? And they have to submit a housing plan, and the housing plan includes, I've got this bank account, this is my budget, this is my expenses, this is what I think I can afford for rent, and they're required to look in the classifieds to see what the housing market is and what they think they'll be able to get. So there's a process for it, but they are allowed to live in this sober housing that's provided through the program for a limited period of time, and we do help them then get on their feet and get their own place.
Okay. Do you ever like refer them to these other ones? Like I know a couple of these, like the Gospel TLC and Bridge Street Mission. These.
We do. Yes, we do. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
Right. SHS housing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Lance for a brief.
Just letting you know that we're still working on the dashboard. One of the things Supervisor Marash reached out and kind of get performance measures. I'm going to email all of you. We don't need to go through it today, but it's going to be just a one-page document for each of a couple of the programs we talked about. The Alcohol Treatment Court, of course, formerly OWI Court, a lot of that is historic data. The SSTOP program and the Drug Recovery Court. These are, Michael's just been with us, as I said, a very short period of time. This will give you some historical information. We're still building, gathering a lot of the information to try to identify what those performance measures are, but look for an email, and if you have any feedback, please reach out to me personally, and you can offer that, and we can try to incorporate it. But we're still working on those dashboard measures. But that's all I had with respect to that. I don't have any other updates. If there is any action, I know, or recommendations for HR Finance to look at, we're still on that budget item.
Correct. And that was kind of what I was going to get down to. That. Do you want to speak real quick, Christy?
I would request that you, if you so choose, to refer the friendly amendment for the Clerk of Court's office to finance, if they can consider that tomorrow. And then also for the medical examiner, and the other half would be the facilities tomorrow. But if you could, if you would like to, but that would be 2 amendments. One would be clerk of courts. The other would be the first half of the medical examiner's reduction of 62,968 in personnel that we would then transfer to the facilities and capital management department for utilities underwater.
So what are the wishes of this body on that? Supervisor Marash.
I'd like to make a motion to forward the recommendations Christy just mentioned to HR Finance and Property.
A motion on the table, second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried, passes unanimously. All right, then we'll move on to anything else this body would like to say or discuss on the budget as it pertains to the Public Safety Committee. Recommendations, thoughts for the meeting tomorrow that we would like to pass along. All right. With that, we will move on to 6B, State Local Hazard Mitigation Grant Program Assistance. Jamie Polly, is she on the? Yeah, she's on the, okay.
I am.
Right.
Thank you.
It's all you, Jamie.
Thank you, Chair Boots. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Great. This is a grant that Phil and I have applied for that has become available through the FEMA and the State Emergency Management Program, that they are looking to help protect communities and provide funding for these studies for safe rooms, as well as constructing safe rooms through other grants that will come later. But I put in your packet some information about a safe room and what it is and why it's important for a community to have, especially a community like Wausau that has larger events. It has a lot of wind events, not as many tornadoes as in some areas of the state, but still we do have those types of activities around here. And currently there isn't a space in our community in Marathon County other than some of our schools, which many of them were built years ago and don't always have the standards that they have designed these safe rooms to be now. So there's these grants available. As part of one of the other things that I'm doing within our Parks Department is we're doing a feasibility study for a new ice arena, and that is a facility that could potentially serve as a safe room or have that ability to be that large gathering space for these weather events or any type of actual natural disaster where we would need to put people in a large space for a while and provide them care. One of the big things we talked about when we did this was like the fair. If there was a severe weather event during the fair, where would people go at this time? Right now, a lot of people get in their car and they go home, and that's not necessarily the safest place to be. So we have received this grant that would be a grant to just do a scoping study to see what the community would need, where it could possibly go. Could it be put in conjunction with that ice arena study? Is there another spot for it that we could do? One of the other areas we looked at is if we have to rebuild the junction at some point, but that's a much smaller space, so it would not have the impact for our community. So with this grant, it's a $300,000 grant that we received. $225,000 of it comes from FEMA. $37,500 comes from the Wisconsin Emergency Management, and then our local match is $37,500. Now, with the money that I've already put together for our ice arena study that we were planning to do, that's $32,500 meets most of our match, and then we can use some in-kind services too, which there is opportunities for that in this scoping project. So we're not asking for any funds from the county for this, for our match. We're just asking for the county board to accept this grant so that we can start working on what types of activities and where the spaces are that we would need if we could put a safe room in our community. This did go to the Parks Commission and Environmental Resources Committee last week, and they did unanimously vote in favor of accepting the grant. So we are moving it forward. We thought that coming to your committee was a really good spot for this to be discussed or at least presented as well, because of the fact that it's an emergency management grant and opportunity to be coupled with another facility that we're looking at. It's a great partnership. If we were to do this and we finish the study, and we find out that we at some point will build a new facility, whether it's the ice arena or a different safe room, then we would apply for these funds again, which gives us a really good opportunity to get funded, at least a portion of that construction, because it will be for the safe room. So in your packet, I did also put an article about the village of Spencer. They're the only local community that has received money for a safe room, and they were going to be putting additions onto their high school, and they were able to incorporate the safe room into the gymnasium that they added, which freed up their dollars that they were going to use for that facility for other things, because that was part of a referendum. But there is an article in that on how they designed their gymnasium as a safe room. So I can answer any questions. I think Phil is in the audience as well, and he can answer any questions, but we're just looking for support so that we can sign this grant and implement it in our studies.
Thank you. So yeah, this is, I can tell you right now that Wood County is going to be constructing one actually this winter. So a safe room right downtown Rapids. So any questions? Thoughts?
So then I'd like to make a motion do we pass this on to HR Finance then?
Yes.
To make a
Or does this
motion
go HR Finance? Yeah.
to accept the state local hazard mitigation grant program assistance and pass that on to HR Finance and Property.
Motion on the table. Do I have a second? Second by Supervisor Wilhelm. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
One of the things that Jamie did bring up at Park Commission was that in the wintertime, when there's ice in the ice arena, that there is a covering that can go on it for accommodating people that have to be housed in it. So just to keep that in mind.
They don't just give people special shoes or anything with spikes? Okay. All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
All right, then we'll move on to 7A, Education Presentations and Committee Discussion. Overview of the Marathon County Assembly Ordinance 12.04 Update Draft.
You can try.
Okay. Yep. Everybody can hear me okay? Okay. So, if I can remember how to do this. My name is Garrett Paga. I'm the land use specialist for Marathon County. I work at CPZ. Under some direction from Administrator Leonard and then a task force that was formed earlier this year, we've gone about updating Chapter 12.04, the Large Assemblies Ordinance. So what we're here to do is to give you guys an update on it. If I can get this to actually play. Oh, there we go. There we go. Okay. Now I got it. Okay. So the reason for the update was in 2022, Corporation Council reviewed our large assemblies ordinance and found that it was potentially unconstitutional and unenforceable. There were some decisions from a few years back from Sauk County that provisions in our ordinance were deemed that they did not hold any constitutional standing and we wouldn't be able to enforce our ordinances as it was written. So in June and July, a task group was formed from various members of committees, public safety, infrastructure, and ERC. as well as staff from various departments, CPZ, emergency management, health, parks, rec, and forestry, highway, and the sheriff's office, to analyze the ordinance that is currently on the books and then make suggestions as to where we wanted to go with it. Whether we wanted to enforce large assemblies at all, if we were going to, where we were going to enforce them, and then what that threshold was going to be. So one of the big things that we started out with back in July was, what's the purpose of this ordinance? Quite simply, it's to regulate large numbers of individuals in excess of those who are going to be regularly attending and being on a property in a certain area where they would need other services such as health, sanitary, fire, police, transportation, and other utility agencies. The idea was to protect resources, protect health and safety, and also to try to mitigate any land use conflicts that would occur with individuals in the area of an event of this size. So the next question that they came to is, where is this going to apply, and when are we going to, or why we are going to enforce the large assemblies? The task group came up with the idea that it should be enforced throughout Marathon County and all unincorporated areas. The reason being is the potential impacts to health and safety and then the environment are the same, whether it's part of a county's own town, a town's own town, a no's own town. Those factors still apply no matter what that, where that area is. The third big question we had is, where are we going to regulate, or how many people is going to turn this ordinance and become in effect, and where is it going to apply? So the group came up with a threshold of 3,000 or more attendees at any one time or an aggregate over the course of 8 consecutive hours. So along with that threshold, we considered some other things that would be exceptions to this ordinance, where the ordinance would not apply to certain individuals or certain areas. Some of these were places of worship, stadiums, athletic fields, arenas, auditoriums, and coliseums. The other one that we came up with, because Marathon County has a unique situation as far as zoning, where some towns are county zoned, some are not zoned at all, and some have their own zoning. The other provision that we came up with, where if it came to a point where the area that you're in, you're zoned in order to provide event space, that is the business that you are in, and you've gone through proper approvals, whether that's through a certain zoning district, conditional use with the county, or if that's conditional use in a town's own town, then the ordinance would not apply. You would not have to get a large assemblies permit to hold your event. Some other considerations we gave to exceptions are when it comes to government-sponsored events. So bear with me, this is a little long, but it explains it better than I can. The ordinance fees shall not apply to government-sponsored events held on government-owned property where the proceeds are returned to the government community, nor to assemblies required to be licensed by other laws, rules, resolutions, or ordinances and regulations of Marathon County. Note, this does not exempt organizations from any other local regulations or any zoning ordinances in effect where the event is taking place. Another big topic that the task force went over was fees and recovery. It was decided that the applicant will submit a fee for an assembly permit that will be specified in an associated schedule of fees. We are currently still working on the schedule of fees itself, but they will submit a fee in order to recover that time for review or any inspections or anything, any site review that needs to be done prior to the event in order to cover staff time. Also, the other thing that came with recovery, the city of Wausau has this in their ordinance that they're working on. It's called extraordinary services, and these are defined as county-owned materials or staff labor that is going to be needed in order for the event to occur, that is going to be outside of the normal workings or the normal services that the county would provide. An example that we used is if you're running a marathon you're having a marathon in the county and you need to shut down a county road in order to provide safe travel for people to make their way through and have that event. That would be something that would be outside of the normal operations of the highway department, whether that's they're doing it on the weekend, they're coming in to do overtime, and they're using county materials in order to aid a private event. Another topic we considered is implementation. So all of the applicants are going to come to CPZ, where they'll then be distributed out to the various departments for their individual review. CPZ isn't going to do the review for any standards that the sheriff's office may have, or the highway department, or Parks and Rec. We're not doing those reviews. Each department will do their own individual review and approve their portion of the application. And then it will be CPZ's responsibility to issue that permit at that point, after all of that has been completed. So the timeline that we're looking at for adoption, the task group met twice in July, twice in August, and twice in September. And at the end of September, we came up with the final draft ordinance that'll be sent out to everybody, all the committees, today. Right now we're in the October phase here, where we're doing the informational presentations to the standing committees. Last week we visited ERC and the infrastructure committee, and then obviously today we're here with you. And then the towns, we're meeting, I believe, at the end of the month to do the Eastern and Western Towns Associations meetings to present there as well, and field any questions that the towns may have at that time. So we're looking into November to receive any final input from the standing committees and the towns as far as edits to the ordinance, any ideas, things like that. December, we're looking to have the final ordinance set to present to the standing committees, and then for the consideration in January for the county board to target adoption. So the role of the committees is to review that draft ordinance. Like I said, we're going to be sending that out today to the standing committees, and then they'll go ahead and review that. We're hoping to hear back by no later than November 10th. That way we can analyze any comments, any concerns that have been brought forward, answer any questions, and then have that ready for December. Any questions?
How many departments do you have to go to for this application? Just a quick question. I was curious.
So I'm Shad Harvey, the Land Resource Manager for Marathon County. The idea of this is to have CPZ essentially be the intake of, so the applicant will only have to go to one, and then CPZ will be the individuals distributing the paperwork. But there would be the health department, the sheriff's department, emergency management,
Parks
and Rec.
Highway.
And highway, yep.
Oh, and did you say health too? Okay.
So there is a significant amount of individuals involved in this, and I think that's why it is important to kind of have it directed towards have the applicant come to one place so we can make sure to distribute that correctly.
If I can add one thing, I think it's really going to be event dependent on where
Yes,
that applicant is going to spend, or the application is going to spend more time. I mean, to use your example, Shad, of the marathon, that might call for the highway department to have a greater involvement. But if the marathon starts within a park, there's some interplay there as well. So the good news is it's that for applicants, it's easy. It's straightforward. They already go to CPZ for a lot of this type of work. People know to go get permits there. They did a nice job, the work group, and thank you to all of you. I know Supervisor Mask and Supervisor Marash were on the work group from this committee, but they did a nice job of talking through what makes logical sense. But that was the thought process. CPZ does a lot of this stuff already, and particularly with some of the exceptions that would be in place. For incorporated areas, if someone shows up, CPZ understands what's incorporated, what's not, can say, actually, this isn't a county issue. You need to go to your home municipality, or if it's a town-zone town, a county-zone town, or a non-zone town, they already understand those distinctions and can help the applicant.
Any questions? All right, thanks a lot, guys. All right, we will move on to 7B, opioid litigation settlement fund report.
Okay. If not, I can swing that. Should have been reading ahead. All right, so I'll take this and kind of mirror what Shad and Garrett just went over. So one of the things that this committee has been involved in, or at least heard of, is our opioid settlement funding that Marathon County received, just like every other county in the state of Wisconsin. And Supervisor Sandelsky, you already referenced a couple of these strategies, and within the packet you referred to in some of your questions. These are the available uses of those opioid remediation funds through that settlement, and they start on page 32 in your packet. But to give you a little bit of an overview as to the process that's taken place over the last several months, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, which Judge O'Neill chairs, and she was here before, one of the tasks that they had was to really sit down, evaluate those available uses, look at what Marathon County's needs are, and develop some recommendations. And Marathon County did that through the CJCC, which is made up of up to 19 different individuals serve on the CJCC. Again, the Criminal Justice Coordinating Council, and it's District Attorney Whetstone serves on it. We have the sheriff, other members of law enforcement from the Wausau Police Department, representatives of the Health Department, representatives from Social Services, North Central Healthcare. Really a very broad group of broad representation of not only county government and other local governments, but also just the county as a whole. And if you look to your ordinances, you can see kind of the makeup of that group. But they've been working with leadership from the health department through a facilitated process. And there's some slides in your packet. It's called results-based accountability. And they went through and identified a couple of key things. And bear with me as we scroll through. But results-based accountability starts with really what is this, what is the issue and the outcome, the desired future state that you are looking for. And after a lot of discussion, we came to a results statement that I'm going to paraphrase until David gets it up there, but it is to, we'll go through this too. I'll bounce back to that one. Go up one or two slides. One more. One more. And I'll say one more. Couple more. One more up, I'm pretty sure. Here we go. That's the result. That's the end condition, and it is the statement that Marathon County residents are free from the physical, emotional, social, and economic impacts of opioid misuse. And Judge O'Neill did a nice job, far more articulate than I can be, about really the issues that when an individual is in the throes of substance addiction, particularly opioids, it impacts everything, every aspect of their life. She did a nice job explaining to you in the context of drug court what that looks like. So the result that we started with as a group that everyone coalesced around is this idea that, hey, we need to do our best to remove those impacts. We want people to be free from all of those wide-ranging impacts. So that's a big goal, big lift, right? So the next step in the process is identifying what indicators that we would look at to see if we're moving in the right direction. So the indicators that we came up with, we tried to look at what data already exists, right? You don't want to spend a lot of time and energy trying to evaluate and collect data that you don't have. So we picked two things. The first is suspected opioid overdoses, and that data comes from DHS through the Wisconsin Ambulance Run Report. And the other one is actual drug overdose deaths due to opioids, and that's through our medical examiner's office. So very clearly, individuals that die within our county from opioid overdose, and then also suspected opioid overdoses through DHS and the Ambulance Run Report. We wanted to make sure we were capturing both those. And the hope, of course, is that over time, if you deploy resources correctly or strategically in an effective way, you'd see each of those go down. That's the hope. But we spent, quite honestly, a lot of time talking about it, that we might see a different change. We might see our suspected overdose numbers go up. If we more properly educate people on what overdose looks like, maybe we have more people actually avail themselves of an ambulance. But nevertheless, those were the discussions that we had around indicators. And we have a couple of slides in your packet with that information. So up on the slide on page 34 is the number of suspected opioid overdoses. That's through that RUN report, and you can see that going back to 2018. This is data that's available publicly on our Pulse dashboard that's maintained by the health department. And then you can go to the next slide. We have drug overdose deaths, and you'll see the number. Most recent data we have is 24 from 2022. So those were our indicators. So then the next part of the work that we did, you can go to the next slide, is really trying to evaluate what are the factors that will make the biggest impact in moving those indicators. So it's kind of a very linear process, right? And when we looked at factors, the good news, or I guess bad news, depending on what frame of reference you have, is we have limited levers to pull in terms of where to put our effort, and that is going back to Supervisor Stendelsky's reference to the document that precedes the PowerPoint. The settlement funds can only be used for pretty, I don't want to say limited because they're broad, but there are very clear things that you can use the settlement funds for, and there are things you can't. So we evaluated all of those available uses to try to identify which ones did we think, based on our specific community needs, would be most effective in moving those indicators of suspected and actual overdoses. So you can go to the next slide there, David. And we did that through looking at a number of things. First, the amount of influence we thought each individual factor had on those indicators, and we used a kind of a quadrant approach. We all got up, and for those of you that have gone through it, big wall of available ideas, and we put little sticky dots of various colors next to the indicators we thought would have the biggest impact, and then we discussed those and ultimately came up with the ranking. And where you want to be, where you want to put your funds, is in the areas that have the most influence, and if you want to go down a little bit, our ability to influence those factors. So the high quadrant. You don't want to spend time in the low high or the low. You want to spend time in the high area. So that's what we did. And if you go to the next slide, I think it provides that kind of summary of what strategies we thought we should allocate those funds to. And the first one you'll see is conducting a gap analysis assessment of the continuum of care for prevention, treatment, and recovery in Marathon County. A lot of the things that Supervisor Stendelsky asked a question about housing, that is really part of that continuum of care. What opportunities do we have to make sure people are successful in recovery, and housing is a big part, like Judge O'Neill referenced. The other area was expanding Marathon County's use of the deflection program and the Wausau Police Department's Police-Assisted Addiction Recovery Initiative, the PARI initiative, to make sure we're keeping those low-level offenders out of the justice system and making sure they have as much access to treatment as they can. So those were the high areas to look at. And if you go to the next slide, we'll see some medium areas as well, and I won't go through those. They're in your packet. But essentially, what the CJCC is doing is finalizing a recommendation to be considered by the county board. At the end of the day, if you go to I won't make you bounce back, David, I'll do it. We're on page 30-something. Marathon County is slated to get a significant amount of money throughout the life of these settlements. The settlements are 18 years in terms of the span over which you're going to get the funds. So you're talking, I believe it's about $2 million, in excess of $2 million. So we want to have a strategy, but ultimately it's the county board's decision as to how to allocate those. So the The group is finalizing its recommendations and bringing an update to each of you. This report is, in many respects, that overall update of our thought process and where we have come down in terms of what those things should look like. Again, the first area that we wanted to address was that gap analysis. And as of August of this year, Marathon County had received just shy of $700,000 through that settlement, and we're slated to get a projected additional allocation of $2.15 million over the next 15 years, again, throughout that 18-year settlement. And thank you, David, for putting up a summary of the amounts that we're going to receive and the timetable for those. So that's been the work of the committee to this point. I think we still have a little bit of work to finalize that, but that should be done very, very soon. We'll have a formal report, but happy to answer any questions to this point in terms of the work of the CJCC. I'm just going to scroll through.
Go ahead,
those.
Supervisor Marish.
In the medium category on page 59 of 87, where it says, number 7, support early intervention programs for at-risk students in Marathon County school districts. So I realize this is dealing with opioids and using the opioid money, but in the Board of Health meeting this morning, we had our presentation about marijuana and the effects of marijuana, and it was brought up about having intervention programs for students and really starting to target students at the middle school age instead of high school, because there's a lot more going on with kids. So I guess my question is, would that be possible to do that in conjunction with the opioids, or does it have to be completely separate?
My understanding is, and we can scroll back up to the uses, but my understanding is that the limitations on prevention are not as strict as those with respect to some of the other strategies. And we're talking about treatment. It is for treatment for opioid use disorder as opposed to some treatment for some other methamphetamine, for example, as was referenced. Your early intervention programs for at-risk kids, to your exact point, it's going to be a broader array of risk that you're going to be trying to address through those programs than just opioids. There's not a opioid at-risk program and a methamphetamine at-risk program. There's at-risk programs that deal with, to your point, kind of the constellation of challenges that are facing young people. So the short answer is yes, it should be able to be done in conjunction.
Further questions? Go ahead.
With relation to that, I guess, they still have like the programs, like the DARE programs and things in the schools, do you know offhand? Sheriff?
I think some do, and I actually just had a phone call from a local police chief that was looking to make sure that that type of program continued within their area, but I don't know, I would defer to Chad and Sheriff Bilibin, Chief Deputy Milhausen. Mike, Chad.
To the best of my knowledge, I think only the DC Everest School District does it, and I think that the Rothschild Police Department exclusively does it for them. So even the schools that are in the county, like Hatley Elementary, Riverside, and then the ones that are in Weston and Schofield are actually covered by Rothschild. I don't believe, to the best of my knowledge, that Wausau is doing that program anymore. So it really is a program that is not like it used to be. It's really falling off.
I don't know if they're doing anything else either, but I would echo what the sheriff is saying about kind of my sense is there's been some moving away from the DARE curriculum, but I don't know if there also is some individuals certainly interested in bringing that back.
It's a debated topic, and what they're finding is that this is what I hear. I don't have proof. I'm just telling you what I've heard. That the relationships with law enforcement and the relationship with that school resource officer is great, and that really works well for trust with law enforcement. It's not necessarily effective when it comes to actually drug prevention with any substance for that matter, whether it's alcohol or drugs or anything. So that's what we've been hearing, and that's why I think that program largely is not supported by communities anymore.
And I have no information. I mean, I would certainly defer to school districts as to where the funding would come from for that. It's been my experience as administrator that funding matters for all things. If someone wants a program to be funded or wants a program to happen, they come with funding. The conversation I had with a local law enforcement, local police chief was just that, like what funding is available to have that sort of program.
Anything further? All right. With that, we'll move on to C, update on jail kitchen and forensic science center. Start with the kitchen.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. I will start with the kitchen. So I've received the current bid day construction cost for the project. That sits at roughly $624,000. That's possibly going to go up due to space needs adjacent to the kitchen. They're for storage or for some cooling or chilling areas. So what's in those rooms would need to be relocated. So that will get finalized very quickly, and then we'll have to bring that back through committees and the board for approvals. Just some context on that is that, the jail has unique requirements, as I'm sure you know, but there's, if there's needs, for instance, in the venting and HVAC up in the ceiling, but it's not just a typical ceiling. There's several inches of plaster that you have to take away and put back. So just that removal and reinstallation, once you've solved the venting situation, is just $50,000 on its own. We are looking at an alternative approach using steel. DOC kind of limits what options you have there, but we'll do the cost comparison and then finalize the overall document to bring back. We're also reaching out to vendors to determine some expected lead time on key equipment, things like hoods, things like that. It seems like the lead times have gotten a little bit better on most of those things, but until we hear back from them, we're not entirely sure, but that will obviously have an impact on the timeline for construction. If there are lead time items, work could still commence, and then you just kind of work back to those pieces and plug those in towards the end. I also met again with the UW last week to look at using their cafeteria space as sort of a stopgap measure, just because we're running up against the end of the year. North Central, they're still providing the service and doing a fine job of it, but their focus is obviously on the nursing home and their primary clientele. But when school started up, they lost some staff, and so they're okay for now, but it's just a sensitive situation, whereas if staffing became an issue at North Central, then they would have to make a choice, and then that presents other challenges to us. So if we can put together a stopgap measure to get Summit online prior to construction being complete, then they could be in that cafeteria space for a few months and get their staffing up and running, and then move into the jail kitchen space once it was completed. So we're going to follow up on that discussion this week with Administrator Leonard and UW leadership to iron out any potential wrinkles in terms of our being in that space, should it be a viable option, which it does look like it would be. Then you want to bring in the parties such as North Central, Summit, and others to make sure that that's a smooth transition in terms of the overall process. So once we've hashed out those details and agree it can be done, we'll work with those partners and then put together the plan for moving that. So that's essentially where it's at. When we do bring it back, I'll make sure I include the entire document that shows you where all the different costs are at in terms of, it includes the equipment, things like this, so that you're seeing where that overall cost is at. But there's certainly some factors involved. There's a need for a 2,000 CFM of additional makeup air, so we got to put that up on the roof. And based on the layout, there's going to be a need for an additional jail door, which are highly specialized. So that's another lead time item that we're looking into, but it's also a high cost. But then once, if the jail kitchen moves forward and is completed, then essentially the jail would have the ability to make the meals for the inmate population, moving forward, all the way up to the capacity of the jail. Did you want me to answer questions or move on to the next one?
We can answer questions on the first one. Any questions on the first one?
Okay, for the Forensic Science Project, Forensic Science Center project, sorry. We're still holding lots of meetings, as you might imagine. There's multiple partners involved, so lots of pieces in play from mechanical, electrical, the architecture team, design team. We had a meeting this week about coordinating IT between the various parties, and the task force will be meeting again soon. So that's all very complex as a part of the project because it's not a traditional project, if you will, in terms of funding and all the different parts that are in play, but it's going very well. The fundraising effort, thanks to Jess and Sarah and all the people who are supporting them in that effort, it's continuing in earnest. It's receiving lots of positive feedback from the community. They've submitted some grant applications to some local foundations, so we are expecting to hear back on a couple of those soon, and we'll continue to update you on those moving forward. I imagine if we do get some of those back with some positive news, you probably hear that before the next meeting. We're also having the hard conversations now on the design side. To generate options that would fold into a plan should you have a funding gap that you needed to address. So it's not to say that there's necessarily going to be one, but it's prudent planning to say, look, what are areas of this that we can cut back on or square footage you can remove so that should the need arise, you already have a plan in place and you know how to move and you're not scrambling trying to figure out what to do. Some of those items would probably need to be decided on sooner rather than later because the project's moving into a construction document phase away from design. So that construction document piece is really emphasizing on what's going to go into the project at that phase of the decision. There are also aspects of the project that you can address as it moves forward, but also during construction. That's true for a contingency situation where you would have an array of options and you'd make a choice. Similar to, there's the southern, this is just a hypothetical example, but this southern portion of the building is currently designed one way. You could change it to being precast steel, which might lower the cost. It wouldn't look the same, but it's not the primary focus point of what people are looking at. So it still ties into the campus, drops down the cost a little bit, and that's an item that you can address later on in a process. It's just important to let you know that we're trying to have those conversations proactively. Last piece is an RFP for construction management services is going out on Thursday. We've had a lot of conversations about this internally and with some outside vendors who we're already currently under contract working with to think about what's the delivery method that we can work with to kind of put the sorts of things that I was just talking about on the front end of the conversation so that people coming in know when they're sitting down as part of the design conversation or construction conversation, like the county's already looking at doing these things. And what I mean by that is kind of like a negotiated contract that contractors would use for school districts where they have a real hard cap in terms of what funding is available. So everything behind that hard limit of funding has to be negotiated along the way, and having that on the front end is really important. So things that we could do would be self-performing some of the things, like we carpet tiling. We have people who do that. So if we had people internally who could do that, that would generate some cost savings. Similarly, there are aspects that you might not traditionally go out and purchase owner direct, but by doing that, you reduce the cost by removing the markup. And that's another piece of having that negotiated contract piece. So somebody coming in knows on the front end the county is going to purchase X, Y, Z, and ABC, and that markup's not going to be part of what they're getting out of the project. They're still going to have things that they do, but again, it's having it being fully transparent from the get-go. So some examples of that would be purchasing doors, purchasing HVAC equipment, especially because air handlers and things like that have a very long lead time. So if we can buy it sooner and avoid the markup, then you get it in play sooner for the construction phase and you save some money. We do that normally just to make that point, but we're looking at how do we fully maximize it and kind of push the envelope on a construction management approach to kind of hybridize between what you might do more traditionally and what you see school districts and the like doing more often, just because, again, it's just a different approach to the negotiated contract piece. So that should serve us well, and we'll see where things go. I'm looking forward to the next update because we should have some interesting information to share, based on what we hear back in terms of foundations and the like. But happy to answer questions there as well, and Jess is here too.
Questions? Go ahead.
I didn't hear the word solar in the design, and I would hope that we would at least entertain that, given the 30% federal tax credit that's available for local units of government. And I would hope that that would be on the table when we're talking through options. If we can get a panel on the side or something else that may save us long term on the operational cost, and we may be able to cover some of those costs up front.
Yeah, we've had that conversation with the design team about, if you wanted to put something on the roof at any point, you could have the roof structured in a way that it could support the weight. Same idea with the southern face. So I think we can talk back with them again to see like what that might look like as part of it, and then have that sort of like as an alternative look in terms of here's the main piece moving forward, and then here's what that would look like if it was coming into play.
Go ahead.
And then return on investment with that. My question was, do you have any contractors in mind for this project yet?
Not really. I mean, I can tell you that, we would go out to bid, so you would have to go out to market and see who would respond. But that being said, this is a really unique type of project. There's not a lot of contractors out there who have more experience, so that limits it more to the larger names, the Findorfs, Myrons, et cetera, of the world. There's others beyond our region that might also be interested, but typically there's a known commodity in terms of who has what you would need to bring to the table to actually provide the construction management services.
And you're bringing this to bids probably this fall yet, correct?
Well, the target has always been to have everything in play for like a January bid window.
Okay. Which I was going to say, right now, fall to January, you're going to get a lot of bidders. So. Further question? All right. Thanks a lot, Chris. Next meeting date and time, announcements, and future agenda items. Committee members are asked to bring ideas to future discussion. B, next meeting Tuesday, November 7th, 2023 at 1:30. Anyone have any announcements or anything they'd like to bring up? If not, we'll take 9. Motion to adjourn, second. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carried. Thank you, everyone. Quick and painful.